What is the number one killer of human beings in the history of the world? Ask yourself that question. What one thing has killed more people than any other thing? Cars, food, cancer, weapons, the weather, disease, war. What has killed more people than any other force or creation on earth? Governments. The answer is governments. Governments have killed more people and have allowed for the wholesale killing of more people than any other force in the history of the world. You could argue that it's people that have killed more, but it's only when people can come together and form organizations that they can truly commit wholesale slaughter. So it becomes somewhat of a semantical argument. But it is the organizational force of governments that kill more than anything else. And it's fascinating because we form governments to protect ourselves from being killed. You read Thoreau or Thomas Hobbes, Leviathan, or John Locke, and all of these competing ideas of, the man in nature and why governments are created. But they all fundamentally, some have very negative views of human nature like Hobbes, and other ones have very positive views of human nature like Locke. But they still fundamentally argue that governments are created to help protect mankind. Yet governments are the ultimate force that is used to brutalize mankind. And why do I make this point today? If there was ever anything that should frighten us more and reveal to us the trajectory of where these technological systems we have built are leading to, it is with what is occurring in China today. And I speak about this again and again during this period, and I don't care if it dates these videos. I don't care if it makes these too centered on a singular event, whether this event blows over or not, because it highlights the trajectory of where our world civilization is moving in the context of technology. People want to argue about whether or not the coronavirus was man-made or not, and whether or not it was a biological weapon. And there's many conspiracy theories swirling around on the internet right now. There are doctors and research institutes that are saying it's very clearly a biological weapon. I saw a report right before I started recording this video talking about at the UN, the ambassador from China admitted at the UN that it's a biological weapon, though I haven't been able to vet that yet. And maybe it'll come out that it was. Or maybe it'll all be hushed up, even if it was. And maybe it wasn't. But you know what? Ultimately, it doesn't even matter. And why doesn't it matter? Because there's a larger social issue that we have to discuss. And that larger social issue is the conversation of how technological systems can be used to track and control entire populations on an order of magnitude that has never been imagined in the history of the world. Hundreds of millions of people locked in their homes, while automatic surveillance systems backed up by artificial intelligence are tracking everyone, where they're going, social credit scoring systems that decide whether or not they are a threat to the society, drones flying through the streets, monitoring everything, creating whole surveillance grids physically, and then people being drug out of their homes, which numerous videos are leaking out of China showing this now, to be taken away for quarantine. When we don't even know for sure if those people are sick or not, or they could be political dissidents or political prisoners. China's locked up millions of peaceful Muslims in their western provinces. The world says nothing. The United Nations and numerous political groups and NGO groups worldwide have cataloged that China is engaged in organ harvesting of its prisoner population. So you're talking about a civilization with the ordered use of technology and drones, and I'm sure eventually robots, to control and abuse their population. And now a biological event occurring which allows them to maximize the use of those systems to control their population. Now let's do a thought exercise for a minute. 3 months ago in Hong Kong, there were millions of people on the street, causing massive political unrest. Now those streets are empty. Now a government that was being threatened by protests that were destabilizing the entire region that they were occurring in, and possibly the entire political order of the nation, now suddenly there's a black swan event which allows that entire situation to be controlled, for the government to assert its authority and power, and for all questioning voices to be silenced. And again, the point isn't whether or not there was a conspiracy to engage this. We have to get past that thinking. We have to get past that discussion and see that the minutia of the drama of us discussing whether or not this is something that has been intentionally done becomes irrelevant in the face that it is happening. That this is real. That a government is effectively using technology to 100% control its population. And that in a time of crisis, it will do so. And that brings me back to the whole point of what is the greatest killer in the history of the world of people? What is the greatest controller? The very systems that we create to protect us and to liberate us from the state of nature brutalize us as an animalistic force from the state of nature. This is the great quandary and question of civilization and of human beings coming together to protect themselves with governments. We create these systems to safeguard our rights, yet it is these systems, when they become too powerful and too omnipresent, that strip us and destroy our rights. And this is the quintessential message and the central theme of what I am trying to explain in these videos, of why I am saying we must feed our future, why human beings must take back their power. We are always, as I've stated before, again, and will state forever, one event away. One event away from the world that you've known, from the freedoms that you've enjoyed your entire life being removed from you, because that power you have given up. The great abundance and the great plenty that has existed in our world has lulled people into a state of apathetic powerlessness. Powerlessness. And that's what we're seeing happen in China. We're seeing a population that is 100% under the control of a central authority. And we're seeing that in a time of crisis, that central authority will protect itself, as all governments always have and always will. This is the foundation of the idea of why you need limited government. What is the old quote? A government that has the capability of giving you everything has the capability of taking everything away. And it is only that thin veneer of trust that people have, and really human laziness that people have, that they willingly walk into such situations. Because it's always easier to believe and say, oh, it couldn't happen here. Could it? Could it happen here? If we were under a full pandemic, you don't think that the same mechanisms of control and dominion would be used on you? And then again, as a thought exercise, people that voted for Trump viewed Hillary as an evil monster that had to be stopped. People that voted for Hillary viewed Trump as an evil monster that had to be stopped. The one constant fear that all sides have is their freedom being taken away, is living under the rule and directorship of people that they don't fundamentally believe have their best interests at heart. And yet, as soon as it's their political candidate, they're totally willing to capitulate and give themselves over. And that is part of the problem and part of the thinking that we have to change, that we must evolve out of. Systems of control are designed to protect themselves. They are fundamentally the same as biological organisms. They pull power into themselves, and they create symbiotic or parasitical relationships with their hosts, the citizenry, the users, the consumers that interact with them. And these systems of control, these power management systems, have a life of their own and a desire to live and thrive on their own. And in a time of crisis, these systems will turn on you. They will devour you for the sake of perpetuating themselves. This is the gateway that we stand at in the 21st century and in the continued evolution of human government, civilization, society. Our world will continue to become more technologically oriented and centered, and whoever controls that technology controls the world. And if you want to see a picture of the world, if you want to see a picture of what the future will be, look no further than China. They're just a little bit further down the road than the rest of the world. In many ways, the United Nations and the tech companies call China the model of the future. A world where technology is used to 100% control the population. Smart grid cities, social credit scores, artificial intelligence cataloging all of the information. Robotics and drones used to enforce the will of the machine. And most of humanity sleepwalking right into its welcoming arms. Is that the future any of us want? Is this a world where anyone could be free or happy? Or is it a world where people would just simply survive day from day to day, clutching at whatever cheap entertainment or gadget is shoved in their face to make them more compliant with their own servitude and slavery? Because that's the truth, isn't it? If you make people comfortable enough, they're more than happy to be slaves. Freedom is danger. Freedom is responsibility. Freedom is painful. The truth is Many of us have already capitulated our free will and don't even realize it. Most people are happy to be debt slaves, wage slaves, as long as they have beer, pizza, and cigarettes and good video game or porno or something to take their mind off the fact of their condition. But there is something deeper, isn't there? There is something deeper in all of us. That stirring voice that cries out for more, that seeks more, that turns its face to the sun and feels the warmth of its truth. The great cry of the human race from the depths of the digital matrix, as it attempts to crawl out of its shell, to escape the simulation overlaid like a warm blanket of amnesiac Xanax, simultaneously cloying us to sleep and snuffing out our will to resist. I mean, my God. This is it. This is the truth of our time. Technology utilized to dominate, dominate. Like Darth Vader with black gloves, just reaching down onto the shoulders of humanity and clutching it and gripping it under its iron grip. It's all around us. It surrounds us. And it speaks to our laziness. It speaks to our weakness. It offers to do everything for us, to think for us, to make life simpler and easier. But when the crisis comes, it will consume us. And who knows from what vector that crisis will come? Economic, societal, geological, weather-based. Where will you have stood in the great war of the soul? Because that's what this is. It is a war for the soul of humanity. It is the war of the soul. That is the time we live in now. When human beings will either give up everything they are or become everything they ever could be. And in China, the first volleys of that war have fallen on an unsuspecting and conquered people. And yet, even in that totalitarian regime, the whispers of the desire for freedom exist. In Hong Kong, for the last so many months, they've been waving American flags and singing the U.S. national anthem, crying out to the world for their own liberation, and the echoes of that being felt across the entire Chinese empire. And now this, a biological nightmare, shaking the very foundations of that society to its core. And who knows what can come from this? There's so many trajectories and vectors that this can go along. Everything's balanced on the knife head. And that's the way our future is. And that's the flavor of our time. As we're balanced on a knife edge, where human will and decision and the human spirit, and whether it truly is worthy and strong to overcome that darkness and embrace the light. Because for every negative of these technological and technotronic systems that exist, there's a positive. For the first time in human history, we have the technology to truly create independent, abundant civilizations. Communities organized around truly ecological and empowering principles, where we don't have to rob or rape the planet or destroy our environment to live a quality of life that has very rarely ever been achieved. But it is now at that exponential moment. And that's the other truth of our time, is these moments and these events will only continue to come faster and faster and faster. Where we will be propelled into the future. And we have to make a choice. You have to choose what kind of future you want. And the apathetic and the ignorant, they made their choice, and then their choice will be made for them. But right now, the unveiling, the revealing of the beast system is happening right now. The use of technology to control entire populations has begun. It began with the implementation of the very networks that are utilized to create the communications backbone, and that has occurred over the last generation. And now the next generation will be the implementation of the physical extension of the control mechanism from that network into reality. So eventually, the same way that Google and the mainstream and YouTube can control the dissemination of ideas across their platforms, now into the physical world, does the physical component of control become unveiled. Drones, robotics, policing and military enforcement by drones and robotics controlled by artificial intelligence. It's here. It's here. It's being built all around us every day. We're told that it's for our own good. We're told that it's going to make things better. We're told that it's going to make things more efficient and easier. And yet, our political and economic class has shown us nothing. Nothing over the last 100 years, over the last 1,000 years, over the last 10,000 years that they could ever, that they could ever be trusted with this power. This power cannot be trusted to anyone. The power to monitor all ideas, the power to monitor all people, the power to understand each individual's thoughts, the power to control all information flowing from one individual to another across the world. And here's my prediction. As these systems become more omnipresent and more oppressive in nature, you will begin to see a resurgence of old technologies, old communication methods, as people begin to flee it. But even with that, they can't flee it. In Orwell's book 1984, In a Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, the technology that we have today could not even have been dreamed of. People want to have self-driving cars. Everything now, everything leads to the disempowerment of the human individual. As larger and larger collectivist systems are built, and people don't even have enough of a political understanding or education to understand what collectivism even is or where it falls under the political spectrum. I saw a young man writing on Facebook the other day. Considers himself an intellectual and is a socialist, and was railing against nationalist socialism, Nazism, being associated with socialism. And he didn't even understand he was mocking himself. People question all the time, why is it communism and nationalist socialism, which are at opposite ends of the political spectrum, manifest as the exact same thing? Command and control economies with secret police, large militaries run by a small group or a dictator. Why is it they look and operate the exact same when they're supposedly at completely opposite ends of the political spectrum? Because they aren't. There's only one political spectrum. On one end, you have individualism and the freedom of the individual, and on the other end, you have collectivism, which is the idea that the collective good is more important than the individual good or individual freedom, and that all decisions should be made for the collective good. Once you understand that that's the true political model, and this was taught in the United States up until the 20th century, it was foundational in our political understanding. It was only in the beginning in the 30s and 40s that gradually, through the charity groups like the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation, the Carnegie Endowment, taking over the colleges and funding professors, that literally they erased this concept out of the nomenclature of the United States. To where now we're 3 generations later, people don't even understand this concept, where it was foundational and taught in all of our schools all the way up through the early 20th century. And why is that? Because corporations and elites can utilize command and control economies to plunder those economies. That you will always find in any command and control economy, socialist, communist, fascist, a small elite party that uses the mechanisms of government to disenfranchise the rest of the population, to rob everyone else. It's why in Venezuela right now, they're a socialist country supposedly, and their elite are throwing music festivals and having giant luxury malls built, while a majority of the population is starving. They've eaten the cats, the dogs. They went into the zoos and ate all the animals out of the zoo. And people go, oh, well, that's not real socialism. Any system of government you create that has the power to give you everything has the power to take everything away. And it is human nature that there will always be bad people that get control of those systems because they learn how to lie and tell the public and tell the political constituency whatever they need to hear so they can get control of the political system and then utilize the political system to rob the public. It has never changed. Going back to Caesar, it's the same problem over and over and over again. The foundation of the United States government was the idea of creating a limited government because of this problem. It was so well understood that the whole idea was you have to create a government that is as limited as possible, has as little power as possible, because no matter what the good reason is, it's told to the people. Eventually, someone bad will tell everyone exactly what they need to hear, get control of everything, and then take everything from everyone. And this is what happens over and over and over again, despite whatever political system you want to analyze and reference throughout human history. This is what happens given enough time. So the parallels between human history and this, and now you add in this element of technology that allows for the amalgamation of data and control that has never before occurred. I mean, we are talking nuclear weapons, sociological nuclear weapons. That is what artificial intelligence is. That is what these communication systems that can monitor and track once they're married with artificial intelligence. See, the biggest problem before AI existed was actually even effectively utilizing these tracking and tracing systems to monitor what everyone was saying and thinking. What took so much human manpower, it wasn't capable to compute all of the data. Now, artificial intelligence solves that problem. And then when you create the enforcement mechanism of robotics being integrated into enforcement technology, wow. You are off to the races, unimaginable concentrations of power. Unimaginable capability for human beings to be abused on a wide scale by a very small number of people. And the truth is, we all know that these systems, once in place, most people would capitulate to them and go along with it. They already do. Oh, I can't say that idea. My social credit will go down. And then the drones might show up. We are so close. We are so close to absolutely losing everything. And it's because all of these systems have been introduced as time-saving, convenience-creating systems. George Orwell, when he wrote 1984, he talked about there being a listening device in every home in America, in his fictional country of Oceania. And the listening device was considered something, people were afraid of it. They understood what it was doing. People buy their listening devices and put them in their homes. Alexa, Siri, Google Helper. All of these apps are listening to you and cataloging you 24 hours a day and building profiles on you. And you don't think the governments of the world will utilize that as well? And are utilizing that as well? All of these systems enslave us by our own laziness. And one day you wake up and you're a slave. And you became one because you didn't know what slavery was, and because it was so comfortable to allow it to happen. But the day that it comes and you have this rude awakening that you have absolutely no control over your life. That's what's happening in China right now. People are learning just how little control over their lives they ever had. We never thought it would happen again. And yet it's happening right in front of our very eyes. The complete takeover of human society with technology. The complete subservience of human society to the controllers of that technology. And the facade that it is there to serve you, pulled and snatched away by one event. How long until that event happens here? How long until the drones are flying in the streets here telling us how to live, where to go, what we can do, what we can say, what we can think? We are on the path to that world. Not so many years from now, there will be drones everywhere in the sky. Not so many years from now, there will be credit social score systems determining where you're allowed to go. It's already here. We're already in the system. And we have to make a choice very soon about whether or not we're going to give up our humanity to that system. So, one of the other things I've been meaning to talk about that seems vitally important to address is preppers. I myself have been a prepper for a long time. I have family land, we've farmed it. It's set up for us to go to in a case of an emergency. I have food, I have water, I have weapons, I have networks of friends that have food, water, and weapons, all ready and prepared to deal with any kind of emergency that we need to support one another. And yet, the more prepared I become, the more I realize that preparedness is absolute bullshit. It is a fundamental waste of time and resources. Why is that? It's an escapist and it's a defeatist idea. There is no safe distance in this world. There is nowhere you're going to go to that you will not have to deal with other people in the case of a true economic or societal collapse. Whatever event that can trigger such a collapse, economic, sociological, political, environmental, all that ends up happening if you survive that event is you hold up somewhere in some kind of Mad Max dystopia, where maybe if you're lucky you get to fight the rest of your life to try to live. This is not a true solution to our problems. There is no amount of disaster food that is going to save you and your family. It's a fool's errand. It's a pipe dream. We have to engage. You have to engage. And I'm speaking directly to those of you that, as I have for the past 20 years, have tried to understand their world and do their best to figure out a way to protect their loved ones, their families, their communities from whatever was going to happen. And at this point, I have no idea what trajectory or what direction the collapse will come from. We know we're sitting on the biggest economic bubble in the history of the world. We know that corruption runs rife across all political spectrums and the bureaucracies of our governments around the world. Most people around the world have been actively protesting or joining populist movements on the left or the right, trying to figure out a way to get themselves out of this mess that humanity has gotten themselves into. You turn on Fox News or CNN, everyone's buying disaster preparedness kits, disaster preparedness food, gold and silver. The elite worldwide are buying bunkers in New Zealand and Utah and the Bahamas and heading for the hills. The people that aren't billionaires and have hundreds of millions of dollars to get that far away, they're going to isolated ranches or vacation homes and setting up bomb shelters. The preparedness market over the last 10 years has become a multi-billion-dollar market. People get it. Humanity understands that we're at a crossroads and that we're existing in a very dangerous and turbulent time. And people everywhere, across every spectrum, are trying to get prepared for it. Yet all of their preparation means nothing. The only way for us to get out of this thing is for human beings to come together and to start forming communities. At the local level, at the family level, at churches, We have to start building the infrastructure so that if there is a collapse, individual communities, neighborhoods, towns, and cities, you start at those levels, and then when those levels get built up enough, then you can have statewide and national levels. A grid, a network put in place so that people have the capability of supplying their own food, water, and power. This is the only way, from whichever threat vector the destabilization comes from, that people will have the capability of getting themselves out of it without a complete catastrophe or massive loss of life. You can look at the difference between the way a city like Houston has dealt with its natural disasters versus a city like New Orleans dealt with its natural disasters. And you can see when communities have the resources and the will to come together, they can weather through a great many hardships. But when that will is not there, and when there's no infrastructure there for the people to come together and coalesce around, that's when you have breakdown. That's when everything falls apart. And that's the answer. That is the core of what we have to do now. We have to build the world that we want. The people that want control, they've done a really good job over the last couple of generations of making sure that nobody else was paying attention and that all resources went to control. And now we live in the future. And now we see when destabilizing events happen, how those systems of control can be utilized to create even greater control. And that's the danger. That's the danger that we are all in and that we must all confront. Is that from this point forward, every time there is a great destabilizing event, the systems of control, of government, of power, of the technocracy will take those events and create ever more layers of control and dominion. Until one day we wake up in a world and we have no control over our lives anymore. That is the only way this story will play out, unless we begin to organize and take the reins back. And it begins with individuals going out into the world and finding others of like mind in their neighborhoods, in their communities, in their towns. And implementing systems and demanding that resources be funneled to create systems. And we can do it. Communities can come together and pull their resources and begin to create their own food, water, and power systems for themselves. Now is the time. We are out of time. The doomsday clock has come closer than it ever has before. Geological, weather-related, political events continue to accelerate worldwide, threatening the very stabilization, the very systems that create stable systems throughout the world, destabilizing those systems. We have seen the future. And the future can either be an absolute control mechanism designed by technology, or it can be a free future where all the great bounties of this technology can be utilized to set us free forever. But we do not get to that future by hoarding food and stocking up on weapons and ammunition. The only way we can have a future that's worth living is for us to take control of our communities and start supplying our own goods and services. We have the technology. We simply have to have the will.